What if one of the most powerful longevity foods for people over 75 has been sitting quietly in your refrigerator, misunderstood, underestimated, and overshadowed by eggs? For decades, we've been told that eggs are the gold standard of protein, the perfect food. And to be clear, eggs are remarkable. They contain essential amino acids, choline for the brain, and fat-soluble vitamins. But here's the question that few people are asking. What changes in the biology of the human body after 75? Because aging is not simply the continuation of youth. It is a metabolic shift. Muscle becomes more resistant to protein signals. Bones become more porous. The immune system becomes less responsive. And our microbiome, the vast inner ecosystem that regulates inflammation and nutrient absorption, becomes more fragile. So what if, at this stage of life, the goal is not just protein, but precision nutrition? Hey everyone, and welcome back. If you are passionate about natural health and evidence-based wellness, you've found your tribe. For those just joining our health journey, welcome. We are thrilled to have you here as we explore the fascinating intersection of ancient wisdom and modern science. Do not forget to hit that like button if this content resonates with you, and subscribe so you never miss our deep dives into natural health solutions. We would love to know where our amazing community spans. Drop your city or country in the comments below. Now let us explore a surprising revelation, one that an orthopedic surgeon might understand better than anyone. Because when you spend decades repairing hips, stabilizing spines, and rebuilding knees, you begin to see patterns. You see which bodies heal. You see which bones remain strong. You see which muscles hold. And emerging research suggests that a specific aged cheese rich in bioavailable protein, vitamin K2, and bone signaling compounds may outperform eggs in supporting musculoskeletal resilience after 75. Not because it has more calories, not because it is trendy, but because it speaks the biochemical language of aging tissue. Today, we are going to decode that language. After the age of 75, one of the most silent but consequential biological shifts is something called anabolic resistance. It sounds technical, but the concept is simple. Your muscles stop listening as well. When we are young, even a modest amount of protein can stimulate muscle protein synthesis, the cellular machinery that repairs and builds muscle fibers. But as we age, the same signal produces a weaker response. It's as if the volume knob on the muscle building system has been turned down. Researchers at the University of Texas Medical Branch and later work, published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, demonstrated that older adults require a higher leucine threshold to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis compared to younger individuals. Leucine, one of the 3 branched-chain amino acids, acts like a molecular ignition key. Without enough of it, the muscle-building engine simply doesn't start. Here is where aged cheese enters the conversation in a powerful way. Aged cheeses, such as Parmigiano Reggiano, are extraordinarily dense in leucine. Ounce for ounce, they deliver a concentrated amino acid payload. But something even more fascinating happens during aging. Over 12, 24, sometimes 36 months, enzymes break down casein proteins into smaller peptides. This natural fermentation process essentially pre-digests the protein. Imagine trying to light a fireplace. Eggs provide solid logs excellent fuel, but they require effort to ignite and break down. Aged cheese, in contrast, offers kindling, smaller pieces, easier to metabolize, faster to signal. After 75, digestion is not what it used to be. Gastric acid production declines. Pancreatic enzyme output can diminish. That means the body becomes less efficient at liberating amino acids from whole foods. A protein that arrives partially hydrolyzed has an advantage. And here's the orthopedic insight. When surgeons repair a hip fracture, they are not only stabilizing bone, they are watching muscle recovery determine outcomes. Studies consistently show that muscle mass is one of the strongest predictors of recovery and independence in older adults. Sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss, is not cosmetic. It is survival biology. So the real question becomes, are we meeting the leucine threshold at each meal? Research suggests older adults may require 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine per meal to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis. That often means 30 grams or more of high-quality protein. For someone with a smaller appetite, that can be difficult. But 2 ounces of a dense aged cheese can provide a meaningful leucine surge in a compact form. Now, this does not mean unlimited cheese. Balance matters. But strategically incorporating a small portion alongside vegetables, legumes, or even eggs can elevate the entire anabolic signal. Have you ever noticed that older adults often eat less at breakfast? Perhaps a piece of toast, some tea. What if that first meal of the day included a targeted leucine boost? This is not about eating more. It is about eating smarter. And if this insight is helping you see protein differently, not as quantity, but as biological signaling, consider subscribing. Because understanding the molecular language of food changes everything. Muscle is not vanity. It is metabolic armor, it is glucose regulation, it is fall prevention, it is independence. The tragedy of aging is not years passing, it is signal loss. When we restore the signal, we restore possibility. And in the next chapter, we will explore something even more unexpected, a vitamin hidden within aged cheese that acts like a traffic controller for calcium, determining whether it strengthens your bones or hardens your arteries. If muscle is the engine of longevity, bone is the architecture. And architecture depends not only on raw materials, but on instruction. After 75, the challenge is no longer simply calcium deficiency. In fact, many older adults consume adequate calcium. The problem is misdirection. Calcium begins depositing where it does not belong in arterial walls, while bones quietly lose density. We see osteoporosis and vascular calcification rising in parallel. This is where vitamin K2 becomes profoundly important. Most people are familiar with vitamin K1, found in leafy greens and essential for blood clotting. But vitamin K2, particularly the form known as menaquinone 7, performs a different role. It activates proteins such as osteocalcin and matrix Glay protein. These proteins act like biological traffic controllers, escorting calcium into bone tissue and preventing it from accumulating in arteries. Without sufficient K2, calcium floats without instruction. Fermented and aged cheeses contain meaningful levels of vitamin K2 because bacteria involved in fermentation naturally synthesize it. Eggs, while nutrient-rich, contain only modest amounts in comparison. A landmark study from the Netherlands, the Rotterdam study, followed thousands of participants and found that higher dietary intake of vitamin K2 was associated with reduced arterial calcification and lower cardiovascular mortality. This was not a small effect, it was biologically significant. Think about that. The same food that supports bone remodeling may simultaneously protect vascular elasticity. Orthopedic surgeons understand the visible consequences of bone fragility fractures, spinal compression, joint collapse. But what they also witness, often indirectly, is vascular health determining surgical outcomes. Arteries must deliver oxygen and nutrients to healing tissue. Bone regeneration is a vascular event. So we must ask, what are we feeding the calcium conversation inside our body? Aged cheeses, such as Gouda and Parmigiano Reggiano, provide K2 in a bioavailable form, particularly when aged longer. The fermentation process is not merely culinary tradition, it is biochemical engineering. Now let me be clear, this does not mean calcium supplements are obsolete, nor does it mean eggs are inferior. Eggs provide vitamin D precursors, choline for cognitive health, and complete protein. But after 75, synergy becomes everything. If you are consuming calcium without adequate K2, you may be building with bricks and no blueprint. So here is a practical framework. First, pair calcium-rich foods with natural K2 sources, aged cheeses, fermented foods. Second, ensure adequate vitamin D levels because D increases calcium absorption, while K2 directs its destination. Third, move your body. Mechanical stress from resistance exercise activates osteoblasts, the very cells that K2-dependent osteocalcin supports. Nutrition without movement is incomplete signaling, and if this perspective is expanding how you see bone health not as density alone, but as coordinated biochemical choreography, take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who cares about aging powerfully. These conversations matter. We are not trying to live longer at any cost. We are trying to remain structurally sound. Bone is memory. It records decades of nutrition, movement, inflammation. But here is the hopeful truth. Bone is also dynamic. Even in our 8th and 9th decades, remodeling continues. Osteoblasts are still listening. The question is, what message are we sending? In our next exploration, we will move from bone to the gut, because aging does not only thin bone and muscle, it reshapes the microbiome. And fermentation may hold one of the most overlooked advantages of aged cheese in this biological symphony. There is an ecosystem inside you that weighs roughly 3 pounds and contains trillions of organisms. By the time we reach 75, that ecosystem has changed dramatically. Microbial diversity declines, beneficial strains diminish, inflammatory species can become more dominant. This shift, sometimes called inflammaging, subtly raises systemic inflammation, weakens immune responsiveness, and impairs nutrient absorption. The gut is not simply a digestive tube, it is a signaling interface between the external world and your immune system. And this is where fermentation becomes biologically elegant. Aged cheeses are not just concentrated protein and fat. They are the product of microbial craftsmanship. During fermentation, bacteria break down lactose, pre-digest casein, and generate bioactive peptide small protein fragments that can influence blood pressure, immune signaling, and even antioxidant pathways. Think of fermentation as intelligence added to food. In younger years, the digestive system is robust. Stomach acid is strong. Pancreatic enzymes are plentiful, but after 75, stomach acid production can decline significantly, a condition known as hypochlorhydria. When that happens, protein digestion becomes less efficient. Larger protein molecules pass through incompletely broken down, potentially causing discomfort or reduced amino acid absorption. Aged cheese, however, arrives partially dismantled. Long-aged varieties such as Parmigiano Reggiano contain little to no lactose and significantly hydrolyzed proteins. For many older adults who struggle with milk, these cheeses are surprisingly well tolerated. But there is something even more intriguing. Certain peptides formed during cheese fermentation have been shown to act as ACE inhibitors, meaning they may gently support healthy blood pressure regulation. Japanese and European studies have identified these bioactive compounds in fermented dairy, suggesting that the aging process transforms milk into something functionally distinct. Eggs are nutritionally complete, but they are not fermented. They do not carry microbial transformation. Now imagine your digestive system at 80 years old. Appetite may be smaller, enzyme production may be reduced, the microbiome may be fragile. What kind of food would be most strategic? Dense, efficient, pre-processed by nature. That does not mean large quantities. In fact, moderation is key. 1 to 2 ounces alongside fiber-rich vegetables can create a powerful synergy. The fiber feeds beneficial bacteria. The peptides deliver amino acids. The fat enhances absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. Have you ever noticed that traditional cultures rarely ate cheese alone? It was paired with olives, greens, legumes. The microbiome thrives on diversity. And here's the deeper insight. Aging is not just wear and tear. It is altered communication between systems. The gut communicates with bone through immune signaling. It communicates with muscle through inflammatory mediators. It communicates with the brain through the vagus nerve. When the microbiome is balanced, the body's repair systems operate with less friction. So a practical longevity tool includes small portions of fermented foods, daily aged cheese, yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut. Combine them with plant fiber to nourish microbial diversity. Avoid over-sanitizing your diet. Diversity builds resilience. The goal is not sterility, the goal is harmony. We often think of aging as inevitable decline. But what if it is in part ecological imbalance? Restore the ecosystem and you restore the terrain in which healing occurs. In the next section, we will explore something even more structural, how specific dairy-derived peptides may directly stimulate osteoblasts, the bone-building cells themselves. Because feeding bone is not just about minerals. It is about activating living tissue. When an orthopedic surgeon looks at bone, they do not see stone. They see living architecture. Bone is metabolically active tissue, constantly being broken down by osteoclasts and rebuilt by osteoblasts. This remodeling cycle continues throughout life, even after 75. The tragedy is not that bone stops rebuilding. It is that the balance shifts. Breakdown begins to outpace construction. So the question becomes, can food influence the builders? Emerging research suggests that certain dairy-derived peptides, particularly those formed during fermentation and aging, may stimulate osteoblast activity. Casein phosphopeptides, for example, have been shown to enhance calcium absorption in the intestine. Lactoferrin, another milk-derived protein, has demonstrated osteoblast-promoting effects in experimental models. This is fascinating because it reframes dairy not as passive calcium delivery, but as a signaling matrix. In laboratory studies published in journals like Bone and Osteoporosis International, bioactive milk peptides have been observed to increase markers of bone formation. While much of this research is still evolving, the direction is compelling. Food can communicate directly with bone cells. Now think about the difference between consuming a calcium supplement and consuming a fermented aged cheese such as Gouda. A supplement delivers isolated mineral, aged cheese delivers mineral, protein scaffolding, fat-soluble vitamins, and signaling peptides all embedded within a biological matrix. It's the difference between delivering bricks to a construction site and delivering bricks along with skilled workers and blueprints. Eggs provide high-quality protein. Yes, they support muscle, but they do not contain calcium in meaningful amounts. They do not provide vitamin K2 at the levels seen in aged fermented cheeses. They are extraordinary for many functions, but for skeletal signaling after 75, aged cheese offers a unique constellation. Here is something even more practical. Bone responds to 3 inputs: mechanical load, hormonal environment, nutritional signaling. If one of those inputs is missing, remodeling weakens. After menopause and andropause, hormonal shifts accelerate bone loss. That is biology. But mechanical loading resistance training, walking uphill, carrying groceries, stimulates osteoblasts through mechanotransduction pathways. When combined with nutrients that support osteocalcin activation and collagen synthesis, the signal amplifies. Have you noticed that older adults who remain physically active often maintain stronger posture and fewer fractures? It is not random. Bone listens to stress. So here is a simple longevity protocol for skeletal resilience after 75. Consume small portions of aged fermented cheese several times per week for K2 and bioactive peptides. Pair with resistance exercise at least 2 to 3 times weekly. Ensure adequate vitamin D status through sunlight or supplementation under medical guidance. Maintain sufficient total protein intake around 1.0-1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight unless medically contraindicated. This is not about excess, it is about orchestration. And if this insight resonates, if you are beginning to see bone as dynamic, intelligent tissue rather than brittle material, take a moment to subscribe. Because understanding how to communicate with your biology is one of the most empowering skills you can cultivate. We do not control time, but we influence remodeling. Bone is memory, yes, but it is also possibility. In our next exploration, we will shift from cellular signaling to something more practical and often overlooked: appetite. Because after 75, eating enough becomes harder and nutrient density becomes a strategic advantage. There is a quiet reality of aging that few people speak about openly. Appetite fades. By the 8th decade of life, many individuals experience what geriatricians call the anorexia of aging. Taste perception dulls, smell diminishes, gastric emptying slows, hormones that regulate hunger ghrelin, leptin shift in their rhythm, meals become smaller, sometimes unintentionally, and yet paradoxically, nutrient needs do not decline. In fact, protein requirements often increase because of anabolic resistance. Calcium needs remain. Vitamin D becomes more critical. The margin for deficiency narrows. This creates a strategic dilemma. How do we deliver more biological signal in less volume? This is where density matters. 2 large eggs provide about 12 grams of protein. Excellent quality protein, yes, but for someone eating lightly, perhaps a small breakfast, and modest dinner hitting 90 grams of protein per day becomes challenging. Now consider a small 2-ounce portion of a long-aged cheese like Parmigiano Reggiano. In that compact serving, you receive roughly 20 grams of protein, concentrated leucine, calcium, vitamin K2, and fat that slows gastric emptying, sustaining amino acid delivery over time. Small bite, big signal. This is not about excess saturated fat or indiscriminate consumption. Context matters. Total dietary pattern matters. Cardiometabolic health matters. But when used strategically paired with vegetables, legumes, olive oil, and physical activity, aged cheese becomes a tool rather than a liability. And here is the deeper metabolic insight. After 75, unintentional weight loss is often a red flag. It correlates with frailty, hospitalization risk, and mortality. Maintaining lean mass becomes protective, not cosmetic. Muscle is your glucose reservoir. Bone is your structural insurance. Body weight stability becomes a resilience marker. Have you ever noticed that elders who are slightly more robust, not overweight, but not undernourished, often recover better from illness? Energy reserves matter. Dense foods provide insurance against undernutrition. Here's a practical framework I often share. Anchor each meal with a high-quality protein source. If appetite is limited, prioritize density over bulk. Add caloric quality, not empty calories, olive oil, nuts, aged cheese. Avoid filling up solely on refined carbohydrates, which provide energy but little structural benefit. In longevity science, we often discuss mTOR, the growth pathway stimulated by protein. Researchers like Walter Longo have shown that excessive chronic activation may accelerate aging. But here is the nuance. Undernutrition in advanced age is equally dangerous. Longevity is not about minimizing growth signals at 80. It is about preventing frailty. The strategy shifts across decades. In midlife, moderation of excess may extend lifespan. In advanced age, strategic nourishment may preserve health span. This is biological timing, so ask yourself, are you eating enough quality protein for your current decade of life? Or are you following nutritional advice designed for someone 40 years younger? Aging requires adaptation. Wisdom is knowing when to shift strategy. In our final exploration before we synthesize everything, we will zoom out, because food is not just calories, protein, or vitamins. It is information. And when we understand how aged cheese communicates with pathways like mTOR, AMPK, and inflammation, we step into a more sophisticated conversation about longevity itself. If we step back far enough beyond protein grams and vitamin content, we begin to see something extraordinary. Food is information. Every bite we take activates pathways mTOR, AMPK, sirtuins, IGF-1. These are not abstract scientific terms. They are switches that determine whether cells grow, repair, conserve energy, or initiate cleanup processes like autophagy. In youth, growth dominates. In midlife, balance becomes critical. In advanced age, resilience becomes the priority. For years, longevity science, including influential work by researchers like Walter Longo, has highlighted the importance of moderating excessive protein intake in midlife to avoid chronic overactivation of mTOR, a pathway associated with accelerated aging when persistently elevated. But here's the nuance that rarely makes headlines. After 70 or 75, the biological equation changes. IGF-1 levels naturally decline, muscle mass decreases, bone density falls, recovery slows. At that stage, carefully increasing high-quality protein can reduce frailty and mortality risk. Several epidemiological studies have shown that higher protein intake in adults over 65 correlates with better survival, the opposite association seen in certain midlife cohorts. This is not contradiction, it is timing. Think of it like a dimmer switch in a room. In midlife, the light may be too bright, we dial it down. In advanced age, the light is fading, we gently turn it back up. Aged cheese fits into this matrix, not because it is magical, but because it is efficient. It provides dense amino acids that activate mTOR enough to stimulate muscle repair, especially when paired with resistance exercise without requiring large meal volumes. It supplies vitamin K2 that guides calcium appropriately. It offers peptides that may reduce blood pressure. It delivers calories that help prevent unintended weight loss. But let us be clear, context is everything. Aged cheese inside a dietary pattern rich in vegetables, legumes, extra virgin olive oil, nuts, and physical movement that is synergy. Aged cheese layered onto a sedentary lifestyle high in refined carbohydrates that is in balance. Longevity is orchestration. So here is a refined, biologically intelligent framework for those over 75. Target approximately 25 to 35 grams of protein per meal, depending on body size and medical guidance. Include a concentrated source of leucine-aged cheese can serve as one tool. Combine protein intake with resistance or weight-bearing movement within the same day. Maintain metabolic flexibility by avoiding constant snacking. Allow periods where AMPK and cellular repair pathways activate. Prioritize nutrient density over sheer quantity. Have you noticed how often nutrition advice is one size fits all? Yet biology is seasonal. There is a spring of growth, a summer of peak performance, an autumn of recalibration, and a winter of preservation. After 75, we are not chasing maximal muscle size or metabolic intensity. We are preserving independence. We are protecting cognition. We are preventing falls. Food becomes strategy. And now, as we close, we return to the original claim that one cheese may be 1,000 times better than eggs after 75. Hyperbole aside, the deeper truth is this: it is not about superiority, it is about suitability. Let us bring this home. We began with a provocative idea that a particular aged cheese might be 1,000 times better than eggs after 75. Now we can see that the real story is not competition, it is calibration. Eggs remain a beautiful food. They provide choline for cognitive health, lutein for the eyes, complete protein for tissue repair. They are versatile, accessible, and deeply nourishing. But after 75, the biological terrain shifts. Muscle becomes resistant to stimulation. Bone remodeling slows. Appetite declines. The microbiome changes. IGF-1 drops. Frailty risk rises. In that landscape, certain foods become strategically powerful. Aged fermented cheeses, such as Parmigiano Reggiano or Gouda, offer a rare combination. Concentrated leucine to cross the anabolic threshold, vitamin K2 to direct calcium into bone, bioactive peptides formed through fermentation, compact caloric density to prevent unintended weight loss, and a matrix that communicates effectively with aging physiology. They are not better in every context, but in this specific decade of life, they may be better suited, and that distinction matters, because longevity is not about rigid rules. It is about adaptive intelligence. For years, we have framed aging as inevitable decline, a slow surrender of muscle, bone, and vitality. But modern science tells a more hopeful story. Even in our 8th or 9th decade, osteoblasts are still active. Muscle fibers still respond to resistance training. The microbiome can still diversify. mTOR can still be strategically activated and allowed to rest. The body is not fragile, it is responsive. So here is my challenge to you or to someone you love who is over 75. This week, add one intentional act of structural nourishment. Perhaps it is incorporating a small portion of aged fermented cheese alongside a vegetable-rich meal. Perhaps it is beginning a gentle resistance training routine, light weights, resistance bands, chair squats. Perhaps it is simply evaluating protein intake with fresh eyes. Ask yourself, am I eating for survival or am I eating for resilience? Because food is not just fuel, it is instruction. It is architecture. It is permission for the body to rebuild. When we align nutrition with the biology of our decade, something profound happens. We stop fighting time. We start collaborating with it. And that is the deeper message today. If this conversation expanded your perspective, if it helped you see aging not as decline, but as a dynamic phase requiring strategic shifts, then I invite you to join this growing community committed to evidence-based vitality, like this video, if it resonated. Share it with someone who deserves to thrive, not merely age. And subscribe so we can continue decoding the science of human potential together. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what decade of life are you optimizing right now? Because longevity is not a solitary pursuit. It is a shared movement. And the most powerful years of your biology may still be ahead, not because time stops, but because you chose to understand it.